Ask the Podcast Coach for August 31st, 2024.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from theschoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there he is, the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy Labor Day weekend here in the United States. It's a holiday that doesn't mean what you think it means.
No, I remember it was funny when I was growing up. I had a cousin who had a child on Labor Day, and I was like, well, that's a whole different kind of labor for Labor Day. But I got a cousin out of the mix, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, Labor Day. Well, it's basically, to me, isn't it just like somebody's going to have sheets on sale? Something like
well,
that.
That's kind of what it's turned into, right? It's Memorial Day is the same way here in the United States.
Yeah.
It's just a time to put things on sale and have they become big marketing weekends. But no, it actually, I mean, it celebrates organized labor, which for a lot of folks, unions and some of those kinds of things, depending on where you fall into the spectrum of that, you may be in favor of them or you may not be along those lines. But I think everybody, at least here in the U.S., thinks it's just to celebrate workers. And
yeah, workers.
We're all working. So
America, workers, sweat, trucks, beer. Yeah.
And
that's
beef.
It.
It's
and
what's
beef.
for dinner.
It's well, actually, before we get into that,
let's get out of that.
It's not a labor, hoisting your coffee and filling it up with a mug. So filling it up with a mug, yes, filling your mug with a cup of hot Java. And of course, that hot Java is brought to you by my friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. Remember, yes, Mark can do artwork for you that's absolutely stunning. It's beautiful. It makes you look super pro. And he's been doing, I think he's got somewhere between 500 and 1,000 different artwork under it. But he can also do things like PDFs. He can do business cards. We talked about that. He can do an entire website. If you want to see a website, go check out, The Real Brian Show or Congressional Dish or many, many others. The beautiful thing about Mark is not only is he an award-winning graphic artist, he's also a podcaster. So you don't get that whole, well, it's kind of like a radio show, but it's like for the internet. No, you don't have to do that. Mark understands podcasting, and he wants to know is like, what is your show about? What's the vibe? And then let him do the marketing part and the graphic part so that he comes up with artwork that not only makes you look professional, but totally matches your show and gets your branding in alignment. If you want to look good, there's only one place to go, and that is podcastbranding.co. Tell him Dave and Jim sent you.
Yeah, make sure you tell him that we sent you. Big thanks to Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story.
Oh, hold that cup up again.
Sorry, that's the best cup in America right here. We should have a cup day where you get the day off. We big thanks to Dan. We over there right now, Saving Mr. Banks. If we're talking about based on a true story this week, Saving Mr. Banks, Krakatoa east of Java. That was an exciting movie. And From Hell, you would not want to have been at Krakatoa when that thing went off, that's for sure. And From Hell, available for you today. If you need another podcast to listen to, check that one out. From a podcasting standpoint, listen to Dan's production on this. He does a really, really nice job. Just if you're looking for different ways maybe to produce this done. Based on a true story podcast.com. Dan, thanks for your sponsorship.
I love our chat room. I had an idea of where we're going to go. I have a first question kind of thing. DR came with something, and I was like, I don't know that we've ever talked about this. So thanks, DR, down there in Nashville. She says, there's talk about unionizing podcasters, or at least the production part of podcasts. What's your take on that? Well,
that's as an appropriate Labor Day conversation.
It is, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very
as a
good,
member, I don't think I've paid dues since I was probably 22. So 30 plus years as a member of the UFCW, who took lots of money in union dues when I was a grocery bagger / manager / of a grocery store. My store got bought, and we went, that's okay. It's in the contract right here. If you buy the store, you buy the people. And when our union rep came in, he goes, "Yeah, that's been tried in court." And we're like, "Yeah?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's yeah." And I was like, "What am I paying you for?" So I'm not anti-union. I'm just saying, yeah, I still have a bitter taste in
It
my
didn't
mouth.
work. It
It
didn't
didn't
work in
work.
your
Yeah,
situation.
great idea. Didn't really work for that. I know if you are in Las Vegas, where you have to use union workers. Back when I was the head of podcasting at the New Media Expo, it cost $300 to move a chair. That is not made up. That is not exaggerated, because the guy's like, "Hey," I'm like, "Hey, we got 4 people on a panel. We got 3 chairs." I'm like, "I need another chair." He goes, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "We can't have the person stand for the 45 minutes for their presentation." He's like, "All right." And so he came over late. He's like, "How'd that chair work?" And I'm like, "Great, thanks." And he's like, "Cost us $300." And I was like, "You are kidding." He's like, "Nope." Because it was so I get, for me, unions are made for to end things like child labor and
Yeah,
unworked.
they protect workers for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
So
they can.
yeah, I know there are the Ringer, right? There's that famous sports guy who I can't remember his name is. Um, something. Bill Fitzsimmons. No, Bill Simmons. I don't know. The Ringer. They organized a union. There are unions in podcasting, but it's usually on big networks that are probably in New York. So I'm I don't know, pay the worker what it's worth. I think competition right now, especially in the editing space, where there are just tons of everybody and their brother that's done more than 2 podcasts is now a podcast consultant or slash editor slash producer, you know, with literally with like 4 episodes under their belt. Like DR's been in this for years, probably 3 to 5, something like that. I'm not talking about DR, I'm talking about that. But I don't know, Jim, what are your thoughts on unionizing? Do we need a union?
Ooh, this is such like this
Yeah.
is one where I'm begging you to leave your comments down in chat on YouTube. We'd love to hear some of your comments. This is a very charged conversation. There's some folks who are very pro union and some who are very anti union. It doesn't seem like there's very many who fall in the middle, you know,
Yeah.
on these kinds of topics. I think generally, and I can't say if I'm pro or against it one way or another. I think there's probably certain situations where they work. Some probably where they don't. Uh, to your question, does podcasting need one? I don't know. To be honest with you, there I don't know what the benefits would be. To be honest, unions generally these are general statements. They generally fight for balanced wages in some ways, right? In other words, they they can generally protect low paying, dangerous jobs, right? Some of those kinds of things. Um, they can do some collective bargaining, right? The NFL has a union that, right? You think about that. The players are in a union in the NFL. Um, so it can do some good things. I think they can do plenty of bad things too. Does podcasting do one? I don't know, Dave. That's a
Yeah.
really I don't know if there would be enough of a push. Like podcasters tend to come pretty independent. They don't want to be told what to do, and they don't want to pay Patreon, much less union dues, right? So, or they don't want to pay for a host provider in some cases.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to take 15% or 20% in union dues or whatever, however that works. I've never been in one, so I don't know. But
Yeah. Randy
so
said,
yeah, I don't know.
yeah, one of the big media groups did this and then laid off about half their workforce. Yeah, they're like, "Hey, we want more pay. Okay, here's more pay, and we're going to cut half the staff." I mean, it's kind of
Yeah.
there's that.
It doesn't necessarily guarantee you're not going to get fired either.
Right.
That's not what a union is about, right?
No. Yeah.
And yeah, to Chris's point, unions keep bad employees safe. They also
Yeah.
keep bad employers from hurting employees at
Yeah.
times. They enforce safety rules and regulations. I mean, listen, there's a whole history of bad actors on both sides. I mean, the US military works kind of like a union where those in the union don't have any say or don't pay any dues. I guess you pay your dues as a service member. I was in that and I understand how that works. But it's a similar kind of similar kind of organization in the sense that wages are public. Everyone knows what's expected of them. There's negotiated. My daughter, when she started at the public schools here, they're a union, and everything is spelled out publicly. That's one of you can see kind of everything. There's nothing hidden. It's very, very public as far as what the policies and procedures and what you're going to make and some of those kinds of things. So I think it kind of depends on your preference, right?
Yeah.
On what you like and what you don't like.
And the chat room hits this point that even clubs or societies for podcaster, it's a labor of love because it's basically we're herding cats. John Jamango, you can't get podcasters to agree on podcast standards. It's just because
Yes.
it's all different.
Yes.
I mean, we've got the different bubbles. I've been kind of hanging out since podcast movement in the advertising bubble, and those people want things because, well, we got to really make sure the advertisers are happy. And then you got another group that's like, well, no, we need discoverability tools. And then another, like, they all have different kind of needs. Bandry says, my solo hobby podcasting is unionizing because the owner treats me horribly. Yes, unsafe and hostile work environment. That's it. That's the nice thing of a solo podcast. You are your own union. Ralph from Ask Ralph podcast. Unions destroy the economy and were needed at one point. Yep. Now they're just an added tax on workers who generally can't afford that extra cost. The union reps make the bread at the cost of the worker. And Randy Black, who works in the education space. I'm very anti-public sector unions, teachers, unions, government employees, because of the cost to the taxpayers. It creates some tension in my home as my father-in-law has a union, as my father-in-law was a union president. Yeah, it's tricky. And what you get into so let's say a bunch of editors unionize. Is that going to be like a thing like, Wondery or Spotify or, Greg in the basement will only use a union worker? Or can I hire somebody from the Philippines for 2 peanuts and a glass of Tang? You know what? It's not going to stop people from, oh boy, we're not going to get into undocumented, but I mean, there are people that get into this country and they charge a lot less and people use them. And, I'm sure union workers would be like, well, that's not fair. So my question is, when you make something, what is the problem you are solving? And is that solution going to solve the problem? And going back to the herding cats problem, there's a group I'm probably going, I can't remember it. I'm looking for their card. It's like the association of people that work in podcasting. I forget what it was. Tracy and Tina Dietz. And I know a few people that have joined it. And I was like, but it's made for people who work in the podcast industry. And my first question to them was like, why are you guys doing this? And I remember even right now, the Podcast Standards Project, which is kind of a podcasting 2.0-ish kind of thing where they're trying to get well, here's what it was. I was in the room, man. It was like kumbaya. You had Buzzsprout and RSS.com and Libsyn was there, and they all said, hey, if we all adapt these podcasting 2.0 specs at the same time, then the apps can add the features because there'll be all these hosts that have it. So the apps could add it to their app, and then the users or the media hosts could then see, oh, there's a place for this, and if everybody moved together, it would move faster. And it's like, oh, this is amazing. I couldn't believe it. It was like, this is going to, this should work. And then kind of nothing happened. And then Captivate came out with 8 features and Blueberry came out with, I think, 7. And we're all, again, herding cats. And I know Sam Sethi is doing his best to be the kind of the lead evangelist over there to kind of explain what's going on. But it's hard to get everyone in the podcast space to move at the same pace because some, you have older companies with a lot of tech debt. You got brand new companies that can do whatever they want right now because they're starting from scratch. So it's hard to get the podcast industry in general, which even somebody mentioned today, like there is no podcast industry. Podcasting is a delivery method. And I was like, it's kind of a point, maybe. I don't know. You're going to say something, Jim.
Yeah. I think we have to think of this in terms of where do we struggle the most on pricing. And so let's think about ad revenue, right? And today, who sets when we think about dynamic ad insertion or the ad insertion companies or where you're buying ads at, who sets what that rate is? Well, the individual platforms do based on kind of supply and demand and what's available, right? But what if podcasters went in collectively? Now, there was a comment Chris had said, wouldn't podcast editors be a guild and not a union? In this example, because the Writers Guild in Hollywood, right, the folks who write for TV and movies and some of those kinds of things, they do some collective bargaining, right? They can go on strike, and then there's no writing that is done, right? That's done to protect those writers and the intellectual property and the things that they do, right? So what if podcasters got together and said, okay, we're not buying any more ads until we're guaranteed a price that's fair, a price that you can live on, in a price where we make some money, because there's some, we're seeing this with Google right now. I mean, they were just convicted's not the right word. They were just deemed monopoly, right? And here in U.S. courts, they have a monopoly in the ad space. Well, because they have a monopoly, they can squeeze people and from a revenue standpoint, and they can call the shots on what gets paid and what doesn't. If podcasters collectively got together and said, we're not going to buy it unless you guarantee us this price, right? All of a sudden, podcasters start going, oh yeah, well, I'll take more money, right? I join Dave if for $5 a year you joined a guild, a collective bargaining group that said, yeah, no, we're not going to buy these ads unless we're guaranteed this price. All of a sudden, yeah, some of your money is going to go to some of the administration to help fight to get this kind of thing, maybe get some laws passed in the various regions that enforce these kinds of rules. No podcaster is going to say no to more money, right? Right. Would you? Right. If I said, hey, for $5 a year, you can, I'll guarantee you this ad revenue price that may or may not be significantly more than you're making today. In most cases, it would have to be more. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. So those are the when we think about podcasters in unions or guilds or some of those kinds of things, that's a space it could play to help because there is abuse going on from the big ad companies against, listen, we're the unorganized labor force for them. They can do anything they want against us. They can set prices just about anything they want to do. And what do we do, Dave? Oh yeah, okay, we'll take your nickel. Okay, well, I'm just happy to get a nickel a month from you. We could be getting more from them, and they're making billions doing this. Now, is anybody getting hurt in this? No. Is anybody being asked to risk their lives in a dangerous mine for this? No. Is anybody asked to fall off a 40-story building because? No. Okay, so it's a little bit different than it was maybe 100 or 150 years ago. Could podcasters, though, collectively come together and say, we're not going to buy any more ads until we're guaranteed a certain price?
That's what we need to do.
Right? All of a sudden, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I just put out a newsletter. It's supposed to go out on Friday. I decided to send it out today. But I said there are double standards in podcasting. And to me, if you want to see Dave lose his, poop, throw a double standard at me, and I will scream injustice and spit and cuss, and I will lose my cookies all over the floor. And so I come down here and I go, here's the thing with advertisers. I said, I'm frustrated and confused as people like Tom Webster from Sounds Profitable explain how podcast advertising is a no-brainer. And there's just report after report. And I go, so we outperform radio, newspaper, television, online ads. We beat them all. And yet sponsors who advertise on shows such as CSI Newark, Law and Order Special Disturbing Unit, or The Real Housewives of Lubbock, and yes, those are all fake shows, are worried that podcasting is not brand safe. Yet I know that people on podcasting might say, they might say one of those 7 dirty words. I said, go out and hang out with a bunch of group of 10-year-olds, and you'll hear many naughty words come out of their mouths. And I'm not saying we should open the floodgates, but there may be worries about protecting people's innocence, which were lost months ago. And that's weird. I have a streaming error. What am I doing? I just lost LinkedIn. Sorry, LinkedIn. And I said, actress Jenna Ortega better known as Netflix's Wednesday. She's also in the new Beetlejuice movie. She was forced to get on social media and almost immediately got pictures of men's genitals. Those were DM'd to her, and I go, she was 12. She's 12, and we want to keep things brand safe. And I go, but let's stay here. And if you have kids in the car and you get easily offended, I go, when you read the line "pictures of men's genitals," did your brain substitute the phrase "dick pics"? Because they're the same thing. A newspaper would. I should have played the rant jingle for this. A newspaper would say "pictures of men's genitals," and a podcaster would say "dick pic." Both are accurate. One might say a newspaper is more professional. The podcaster is more casual. And so I said in a recent episode of Sounds Profitable, they mentioned that on the brand safety thing, one example, Times Person of the Year cover feature of Taylor Swift was flagged because it was deemed unsafe because it contained language about feminism and torture. Why? Because Tay-Tay's new album is The Tortured Poets. And I was just like, come on, can we give up on this? But the double standard is, it's so frustrating that to sell podcast ads, we have to know if someone really, really, really listened at the 24-minute mark, while nobody says we need to know if someone really, really, really saw the advertisement on page B4 of the newspaper or page 17 of that magazine. That's a double standard. An article about radio measurement said one of the primary challenges in the radio audience measurement is obtaining a representative sample size. It can be difficult to gather data from a large, diverse audience, especially when conducting surveys or interviews. A sample size may not accurately reflect the preferences and behaviors of the entire radio listenership, leading to skewed results. And they talk about how they measure to the nearest quarter hour on radio, and they just admitted that, that's not really that accurate. And yet we need to know that, did that person listen to 7 minutes and 30 seconds when the ad came in? And I'm just like, it's a double standard. And I don't understand if podcasting is truly the best way to spend your advertising dollars, why we're not saying, because Jim, you just hit the nail on the head. When so many people now have the ability to have dynamic content and advertiser goes, okay, I'm going to pay you peanuts. And somebody goes, I'm not taking that. I'm going to pay you peanuts. And then they go to the third person. They're like, and a cup of Tang? And they're like, that's it. I'll take it. And meanwhile, prices of advertising have gone down the last, year and a half. And I'm like, it's not genius here. It's math. So that drives me nuts.
Yeah, and we kind of think, Chris had said this in chat about market forces. Yes, market forces should kind of have an effect on this. But the problem is in the space, it's so large that it's a race to the bottom. And no matter what, there's always going to be people who are going to take the nickel. They're going to be, well, I guess that's okay, right? There's a team exercise that we do from time where you take a long wooden pole and you have a bunch of people around it. Then you say, okay, hold this pole steady as a group. Everybody put their hands on it and hold this pole steady. And what happens is every time, you can't, as a group of people, you can't hold it steady. It always raises because you always feel like you got to put a little bit of pressure against it when and you get enough people putting a little bit of pressure against that stick and it just rises every time. You can never get it lower. It always goes higher. It's the weirdest thing. We as collectively as individuals do the same thing. Like in this case though, the market forces are always drive it lower. You're always going to have podcasters who are just like, oh, I don't care. Or you're always going to have podcasters say, I'll take it. I'll take anything. I'll sign up for this and take anything. And that's kind of where in a collective group, you have some ability to tell people, hey, no, as a group, we're going to do this thing together. So don't do that. And if you do, there's going to be some social pressure against you. Right, type deal. Again, I'm not for or against this and saying neither way. I'm just saying in podcasting, this would be the place. You have to have some money, at stake. You've got to have big players who are taking advantage of smaller players. That's generally where these things are inserted and they work. The problem with podcasting is it's from that standpoint, from a money standpoint, is it's too independent and it's too right. And so in those situations that are completely unregulated, you have giant players and you have a million small players. And that's what we have today, right? We have a relatively small group of individuals who've made it very, very big. And then you have everybody else. And in the middle, there's always exceptions. You've got a few people who are making middle money on this. But I'd kind of say, Dave, there is very little middle class if we're going to use those terms.
Yeah.
There's very little middle class in podcasting, right? It's the big players and a jillion small ones. Sure, if you're doing it for a hobby and you don't care about money, we hear all those things all the time. That's fine. Continue to do all those kinds of things, right?
Well,
just making the point that that's the area this would fit in.
It's the unicorns. It's the Dans of the world, right? That Dan's not, making, 8 million downloads a second, but the man's making, he's paying the bills with that show.
Yeah, and there's some of those, but I think there's relatively few. It's
exactly, that's it.
Yeah. I think most podcasters are in the poor category.
Well, yeah.
And you'll say, well, I don't do it for the money. Okay, that's fine. I mean, don't get wrapped around. We're not trying to say you shouldn't do this or we should create a collective bargaining. I'm just saying that's an area where this might make some sense if we want to actually have an effect on ad revenue. Guys, the ad companies that are doing this they're keeping they're giant and they're keeping all the money. And they're giving us a nickel,
Yeah. Well, welcome to YouTube and Spotify, where if you earn some money, we'll let you keep some of it. Yes.
Well, Chris, you'll earn it, and then we'll take some of it back from you.
Yeah.
And then, right, you're like, yeah.
I'm dying to know. Chris Nessie says, we saw what happened with Sticker Mule earlier this summer. What you talking about there, Chris Nessie? We got a great comments here. Ray from Around the Layout podcast, if you're into model trains, check that out. Let me say that again, that all mags can provide meaning magazines, is circulation numbers, and niche mags are surprisingly low in terms of subscriptions and stuff, and yet they still get big bucks in ad dollars. Why? Because, think about that. If there's a magazine about model trains, how many of those are around, right? So you've got your target audience right there if you're trying to get to model train users, and so consequently, you can go advertise in 7 other magazines that might have model train users that read it, or here's one designed for them. Okay, that has your audience. You will pay to do that. I got an advertising deal just because I was a weight loss show, and it was who I was aiming at, and that's exactly it. Another great tip here from Rich. He says, hey, podcaster setting rates would be akin to price fixing. I'm like, that's a whole other argument. John Jamango says an hour podcast takes about 3 hours to process the audio and then go through the edit and the raw audio and all the other fun stuff and assemble the episode. How much would you charge for 3 hours of work? Would you pay someone $90? And keep in mind, of that $90, 30 of that has to be saved back for taxes. So you're really paying him 60. And then you're like, wait, and then so that's 60 for 3 hours of work. That's $20 an hour. You're like, okay, and you're going to live on that. Daniel says, brand safety is mostly being used as a weapon against conservatives. Somebody else said that. It's really an odd way of kind of, not so much censorship, but we've seen the whole thing. Yeah, this one, John says that brand safe is the new censorship. It seems to be in many, and I see this on both sides in a way, but boy, we're real close to talking in politics here, but I've seen things where, it's just everybody. I love establishments, and there is one in podcasting that says, we embrace all walks of life, and, you are special. Every snowflake is welcome as long as you think like we do. And I'm like, wait, time out a second on that. That doesn't seem to work. And then Ray has another great comment. He goes, isn't it funny how we got here? Wasn't podcasting the anti-big business radio, yet it seems to be turning into that. That's my whole point. Right now, radio is losing their audience on radio. So where are they going? They're coming over to podcasting. What are they trying to do? Turn it into radio. And I'm like, look, I got lots of friends that are, work in that advertising space. I'm like, easy on the whole, radio is 30% ads. That's a fairly well-known stat. And if you go listen to the radio with a stopwatch, it might be more than that. And I'm like, we don't want it to turn into radio. There's a reason why radio is losing their audience. A, they sucked all the personality of it. There's no Wolfman Jack on radio anymore. There's nobody go, hey, baby, what's going on? No. There's Siri, literally in Akron, Ohio, on the one easy listening station. The DJ is Siri. Now, it's not Siri, but it might as it's literally like, Eddie Money, 2 tickets to paradise. You know, and it's like, and then it's a song, and then maybe another song, and at the end of that, she'll be like, you know, Sade, Sweetest Taboo. And then
I
12,
love Sade.
and then like 12 minutes of ads. And I'm like, ain't nobody going to listen to that. Like, you know, unless you're into Sade maybe, but, you know,
Love Sade.
hope it gets played. So how did that work, by the way? Her name is Sade. Shouldn't it be Sade or, I don't know. It's Sade. I'm like,
that's what she wanted it to be. It's okay.
that's it.
It's funny. We fired up the chat room out there. They are. This is awesome.
They're going
This
to
is
town.
awesome.
I'm having a hard time keeping up with the,
Well, here's the good news, Dave. Here's the good news to all this. I'll give you a chance to read some of the chat that's out there.
man.
And bring it up. But Ralph is yelling at us out there. He makes a good point. But here's the good news in this. It's not. You know, it's a perfect topic. DR, thank you for bringing this up on Labor Day, right? A holiday that everybody takes off and nobody actually knows the meaning. But it's interesting as we've talked through this. This isn't happening. You know, there's no organized labor. There's no unionizing of podcasts. It's not happening in any way. I mean, there may be some ideas or talks or pockets or some of those kinds of things going on, but just from it's interesting how fired up everybody has gotten based on just an idea, just a question, not even this isn't actually really happening. We're not doing this, you know, but just some, I think it's a good, it's good thought exercise to kind of work through this as podcaster and say, why am I doing this? How could this be better for me? What am I doing to support things that are in line with what I value and what I'm trying to do? And you know, that's the important thing is that you're in a line. You can't listen, you can't change everybody else's mind. The only mind you can really change is yours.
Oh,
So
dude.
just make sure you're lined up with your own values and you're doing the things that you feel are important with your values in that, whatever those might be. And then don't expect to say those things and everybody agree with you, right? I mean, I think one of the nice things, Dave, you and I in the last 30 minutes is we've had a pretty civil discord about this, even in the chat. There's conversations. Nobody's called each other. Maybe not yet. Nobody's called each other names. There hasn't been any demeaning of people. We haven't had to go after somebody. You know, we didn't have to bring up any history of anybody's background. We didn't have to say things. We didn't have to do any of those things. We just were able to express our opinion, and they're all great opinions, and you can have them. This is the beauty of this. You can have them. And today we'll walk away and we'll all still be, I hope so. We'll still all be friends. And so thank you for having chat room. Thanks for having some civil discord out there. This is not happening very much in at least in the US culture. And so thanks for being civil out there.
Well, the one thing you said, I always love when somebody will post something that's either pro-left or pro-right. And I'm always thinking, was there someone that was pro-right, saw your Facebook post and went, oh, you know what? You've completely changed my mind. I'm going to vote. Right. Yeah. So I love that. But man, this is a great one.
Right.
When the Mets had the Hawk Tua girl throw out the first pitch, is brand safety even really a thing?
Yeah.
What a great point. You know what I mean? Can you see that taking your kid? Daddy, what's the Hawk Tua girl? Yeah, well, you see, yeah. Also, thanks to Ralph for the super chat, $25. Thank you, my friend. He says, I'm not shouting. Well, they were in all caps.
I know. They were in caps, Ralph, and that's an acceptable all shouting.
Yeah, but he did make a great point. He says, you have to come to the realization that you are not going to make money with your podcast unless you sell your own stuff or your name is Kelsey or Rogan. Well, and in this case, or you're dating Taylor Swift. That's why Kelsey. And for the record, I need to double check this because Adam Curry kept saying up to 100 million. Like they didn't get, and it's 100 million over 3 years, so it's 33 million. But he kept saying, hey, up to 100 million. So I need to go read that contract. And I'm not sure. I will say on that point, it's the best way to monetize your show. It's not the only way, because there are people that are using advertising. There are tons of people. If you go to Graphtreon, GRAPHTREON.com, that's where people on Patreon have said, yes, you can see my stats. And there are people making, $350,000 a month on their podcast. Now, as long as you don't say something that makes Patreon mad, that's not a bad strategy. But also, none of those people have been podcasting for 6 weeks. It's more like 6 years. The Chapo Trap House, which is some sort of political thing. Randy brings up a great point. Glenn's Horse Radio Network, awesome supporter, by the way, is a test case, how to earn income in a niche, because most of us have niche talent. My podcast income is limited by my talent and ability. But yeah, Glenn's a great example of that. But it comes back to he's got that little niche. So, and he's Ralph says, you're buying the snake oil if you really think that your little weekly podcast is going to make you $1 million. That's probably true. Generally ain't going to happen. You can sell your stuff and make a living. Yeah, if you have anybody, here's the red flag you need to listen to. When somebody says, I can guarantee you listeners. A, get that like, okay, listeners as in 2 or listeners as in 2 million. When anybody guarantees you success, I simply say, please read to me or list off season 4 and 5 winners of, American Idol. Those people were in front of millions. I don't know who it was, but just getting in front of people doesn't, ensure success. And I didn't know about this. Chris says Sticker Mule publicly came out as Trump supporters and emailed their customers touting this, and the internet has lost its mind. That's a great way to lose business, because 50% of your audience is going to go, what? And I still say, I do not care what the Kraft company stance is on Israel and Palestine while I'm eating. Companies should go back to making a good product at a fair price that is profitable enough to keep them in business and pay their workers a decent wage. And let's let the politicians handle the political landscape. That's for sure. To me, that's just crazy. Are we ready to change topics yet?
Yeah, I think we beat this.
Yeah, this one enough.
Yeah,
all right. So what we're going to do then is Craig has been patiently waiting. You can find Craig at livewellandflourish.com. You can find him at aigoestocollege.com, which is not that I don't enjoy Live Well and Flourish, but AI Goes to College is a bunch of guys, professors. Craig is at, I want to say, Louisiana Tech. It's a school, it's a college in Louisiana, and he's like, if I am here with AI, Craig is like he just swims in it, and he wants to know when is it time to throw in the towel? And I was like, I'm trying to find that question, but he asked that. One thing you can do is say to your audience, hey, thanks so much for listening. I'm going to take a break for a month. I've got some things I need to take care of. This would be a great time for you to go to, livewellandflourish.com/follow, because he's using Podge Page and it's built in, and go listen to all the back catalog. And then take a month, and during that month, do you find yourself going, you know what, this would be like, is your brain still in, I want to make this podcast? Or is your brain in like, glad I don't have to do that anymore? Or I know for me, my first podcast was for musicians. I was no longer a musician. The music business had completely changed, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. And what I did is that show sputtered like a car, like it was going for 9.5 years. Then all of a sudden it was like, and I'm just trying to get it going and pushing it. And it was just, I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so it dawned on me after a while. I was like, I'm not excited about the content I'm creating. It's taking way too much more time. And by that time I had found podcasting, and I was like, this is more fun. And kind of the same reason why I moved from Libsyn to Podpage. I like this. This sounds like more fun. And so there's a time for this sounds like more fun, and this isn't fun. And so in the case of the marketing musician podcast. I was like, yeah, I just don't want to do this anymore. And so I tried a bunch of things. I rebranded it. I had a theme song made because, all my listeners were like, well, I would listen to this if it had a custom theme song. No, that was not going to save it. You know, oh, this is a great show. Wish it had a custom theme song. I'd share it with a friend if you had a custom theme song. Yeah, so that was it. And I just, after a while, Jim, have you had any shows? I'm trying to think if you've had any that you politely,
Oh
put.
yeah, yeah. With Financial Tech was a podcast that he did, or in the early days that was around financial tech. All the things. It was, it's maybe a little early on that one too, but yeah, we put that one to bed. We did Rich's Random Podcast Radio. Is that what we called it? Rich's Random Podcast Radio, maybe. It was just a bunch of us on the weekends getting together and chatting. And Rich Rich O'Neill liked to do the editing of that, and so we chatted for 3 hours. He edited it down to an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. Published that one for a while, and then he didn't want to do it. I did the Silicon Prairie News Minute with the editor in chief of Silicon Prairie News here in Omaha, who later actually is now, I work with him at Gallup, which is super cool. Those two weren't related. He took the job without me, which is when he started working there. I'm like, hey, I know you. So yeah, I've done a few, Dave, that, you get started. The Silicon Prairie News Minute, I thought the whole idea was a 5-minute podcast every week to just talk about the articles they had published the week before. So get in there, a little bit of summary about them. I asked them 3 questions. We were boom. And it's maybe more like 10 minutes, but we were like boom, in and out. And it was really a marketing tool for the Silicon Prairie News. And we did that, I don't know, we did that for maybe a year, and it wasn't working. We weren't doing it right. I mean, if we went in with a goal, we want X number of downloads, or we're not going to do this. We never reached X number of downloads. We tried a bunch of different formats. We just didn't have everything it took, whether that's influence or marketing chops or it was the right time or any of those kinds of things. That none of those, we tried all those things, none of them worked for us. And so we just decided, okay, we're not getting what we want out of this thing. Let's not do it anymore. And
That's
so
it.
we did.
That's why I
Yeah.
would say the first thing you have to identify is, why are you doing this? Because if you don't get your why, you're going to
Right.
quit. And I did a show called the Customer Service Show, and I actually had somebody probably 4 months ago said, are you going to bring that back? It was really good. But it really, at the time, I had delusions of grandeur because I've won. Do I have it around here? Somewhere I have a plaque that shows I was Employee of the Year as a customer service rep for a Fortune 500 company, because I was just crushing it as a customer service person. And so I started the Customer Service Show thinking that I could start a show and, quit my job in 6 weeks like everybody else. I was like, oh, this is going to help position me as a customer service person. I can be hired. I'll come into your company and, teach customer service because I was already doing that, blah, blah, blah. And, I think I made it like 8 episodes. And I was like, you know what? This just sounds like a grumpy old man complaining, because I went into McDonald's. I remember I went into a McDonald's and I got my food. Like, I actually went through the order, got my change, and the person behind the counter did not say a word. Like, not a word. Like, he didn't say, welcome to McDonald's, can I take your order? He just looked at me like, what? And so, I ranted on that. I'm like, what is that? But in the end, I realized that customer service was my job and not my passion. And number 2, I was like, this is going to take a lot of time and work to really position myself as an expert. And looking back on that, I don't think I had a call to action of like, hey, if you'd like to hire me. So that was my goal, but I wasn't my call to action wasn't in alignment with my goal of being hired as a customer. So there are a lot of things that were wrong with that, but that was one that I just was like, yeah, I don't want to talk about this. This is not my passion. It's my job. And that's why it lasted about 8 episodes. And I was like, that's enough of that. So,
it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just sometimes that's
wrap
why
up.
sometimes taking a break, a planned break, like, hey, I'm going to come back on October 1st, knowing that that's really not a good idea, because when you come back, you might have actually lost some of your audience because, well, they're listening to something else now on the way to work. But by taking a break, you kind of get, if you don't get any like, oh, I kind of miss doing the show, then maybe it is time to put it down. So
It's interesting as we look at New Heights and the New Heights podcast, right? Jason and Travis Kelsey doing this together. They were doing this years before Travis started dating Taylor, and they're having a good time doing it. My
Right.
son was listening to that podcast. He would be like, "Hey, Jill, listen to the most recent." We're Chiefs fans here in
Yeah.
Omaha, and so he's like, "Hey, Jill, listen to the latest." And I only knew Travis at the time, and kind of got to know Jason through that before. We've been listening to it before Taylor came along, and they were having a good time. I think without Taylor, they'd still be having a good time and still doing it because they're both gajillionaires. Like they literally have made enough money in the NFL to
Oh, yeah.
support themselves for the rest of their lives, right? Jason has been a long time player. He has been smart. His wife is a sharp financial planner. They're going to be just fine. Travis is making gajillions of dollars as a tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not in this. They didn't start this podcast because they wanted to make a bunch of money. They started the podcast because they wanted to talk about football, and they were just getting together doing it. And they were two brothers in the NFL together. They had some special privilege of both that relationship and their place in the NFL. That's hard. I mean, it's hard enough to have one person from your family in the NFL to have brothers in there working together. That's pretty amazing. Certainly, the Taylor Swift effect has, my daughter is now listening to New Heights. In fact, last night we went out for pizza and the football game was on, and she was starting to ask me questions about okay, what does this mean and what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I don't think anything this was actually planned. It just kind of happened that way. Uncle Marv, who's out there in the chat room today, if Uncle Marv's been on my podcast several times, and if all of a sudden Uncle Marv started getting popular, I would probably call him and say, "Do you want to be on my podcast every week? Like, do you want you and me, or maybe some episodes that Uncle Marv and I have done together get popular, and people are like, oh, we really like these. The two of you together are awesome." If we started kind of getting that feedback from our audience, I'd be like, "Hey, let's do this thing every single week." Right now, sorry, Uncle Marv, we're not getting that kind of feedback, and so you're regulated to twice or every other month at this point. I don't have a regular host, but as a podcaster, obviously you're going to take advantage of those kinds of situations. That there's some folks who want to say this has been manufactured since the beginning, and that's one of those kinds of things. But I'm like, how hard that would be to, like, the NFL has manufactured this from the beginning to get more of Taylor Swift's fans, and you
Well, that's
kind of
it.
go, guys, that's really hard to do. Let's just be serious about that. It's probably
Well,
not that. A lot of
Ja-
luck involved in this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, James and Sam were talking about that. Like, is there a clause for the breakup? Like, in the event you end your relationship with Tay Tay, this contract is null and void and we will no longer pay you. The other thing here on this article from Variety says the deal between the Kelsey brothers and Wondery, which runs for 3 years, is worth more than $100 million, according to a source familiar with the pact. And Adam Curry kept saying up to $100 million, but I'm going to be interested to see who the sponsors are, because if it's like, my butt looks good in these jeans, then because on one hand, it'll be interesting. I know Randy said he thought that show was boring. I listened to it, and it took I think I made it 9 minutes in, and they hadn't got to the show yet because they were talking about their new jerseys and their jackets. It was just nothing but ads at the beginning, not really so much official ads, but they were promoting their own stuff. And I'm with you. I think they started this because the other thing they have that you cannot get anyplace else, especially when they were both playing, was behind the scenes look of what it's like to be in the NFL.
Yeah.
That was the big one for me. And then throw in a little Tay-Tay and whoa, hold on. Now I've got I've got a stranglehold on the 13 to 15-year-old female audience. So I'd be interested to see if the advertising, like if they start pushing makeup or something because they know that's who's listening, that would be interesting. Or what's the makeup store at the mall?
You gonna turn it away if it's real money. I think actually that podcast was doing okay from a money standpoint before Taylor was introduced into it. Now, was it as big
Yeah.
as it is today? Was it $100 million deal?
Yeah.
Probably not.
They're
But I think they were doing just fine
one.
before it started. They also are interesting, to be honest. As
Yeah.
I listened to that podcast, I mean, Travis is bonkers,
No,
but
that's it. You'll
it's
either love
interesting.
Travis or you'll hate him because he's a total like, woo, yeah, let's do it. All right, but he's very stoked in the world of he's kind of got a John Lee Dumas vibe where he's just like, yeah, baby, let's do it. All right, let's. Meanwhile, the other one's kind of just shaking his head as a little brother, like, all right, this guy's crazy. He's
Exactly.
so Travis is the Todd Cochran, and the other guy who I can't remember what his name is the Rob Greenlee. Oh, that's right, Travis. So it'll be interesting to see Jason. Thank you. And and now you kind of want to see what Jason is up to. I guess now I'm counting his money that he's out of the NFL because as far as I know, he didn't get the typical job, which is play-by-play someplace. So.
No, I think he's gonna. I think he's gonna do some analytics. Analyst.
Okay.
There we go. Analyst stuff for the NFL. Yeah, he'll do that for a while. He's gonna listen. He's gonna be just fine. Like he is. He's gonna be okay. His wife is now super famous in the Swift community because she is super sensible and super she's. So my daughter has gotten to know his wife through the podcasts, and she adores her as a Swiftie. And you're like, oh, how cute that they've pulled this all together, and kind of made it work. But you know what this says, Dave? It's interesting. Like, people find the podcast interesting. They found it interesting pre-Taylor Swift. They're finding it even more interesting. And Swifties are coming over, and they're not talking about Taylor. They're talking about football. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of Taylor, sure.
Well, that's it.
But it's mostly about football, right?
Well, and the other people that are listening are reporters, entertainment reporters, because I guess like somebody made a point that a cat meowed in the background, and like everybody's like, "Is that Taylor's cat?" And I'm like, "Really?" And if it was, who cares? I don't know if you know this or not.
People care. You don't, but people do care about that stuff. Hundreds of thousands of people care about Taylor Swift cats. Hundreds of thousands of people.
I want to capture that sound and make it my ringtone. Yes, exactly. John says the last episode of the New Heights, the sponsor was big shocker, the NFL ticket. The NFL is, I would love to know where the NFL is in terms of gross national product for the United States, because they were talking about it on, I think it was Podcasting 2.0, that they're now able to, I forget what the term they use, but somehow kind of get VC money, because people are worried about in the investment space, all these companies, and they're somehow like the NFL made it possible to take outside money. And I was like, that's kind of weird because
investment in the franchises,
in the franchise,
the owners, the franchise owners can now take VC money. It's a certain percentage. I was just listening. I think I heard this on the Wall Street Journal podcast, but they're limited to those VCs cannot have board seats in the NFL. So it's like, okay, you want investments, give us your money, and you have nothing to say. There's a lot going on in the space. If you've been following the financial space, there's a lot going on with Southwest Airlines right now, where there's some there's a couple active investors who are trying to force decisions to happen at Southwest. Right, this is one of the problems with being public and being big. Right, some of these kinds of things. The NFL is looking at that and they're saying, yeah, no. You can put money in, you don't have a say. So they're being very cautious about that kind of money because they don't want. There's big money in capital, right? And
as someone who worked for a publicly traded company, you don't want a board of investors. You just trust me on that, because they make decisions on profit, not is it good for the customer.
Right.
That's
sure. They have a fiduciary responsibility for it, and that's absolutely the way it works. Everybody dreams of going public to make the big money. Make the big money and get out, because now you have accountability from shareholders and your board, and oftentimes
it's tricky.
Sure.
John says, I live just outside of Philly. Jason Kelsey is a legend in this area. Yeah, he is. He's majorly, and
He may be the most popular person in Philly. He could probably run for the mayor, and he'd win probably for sure. I don't. You'd have to tell me. Philly politics are interesting. They did throw snowballs at Santa, so you never
yeah.
know. You never know in Philly.
DR says, do you listen to podcasting 2.0 at real speed or do you up it? I don't know that I listen to a single show. The only one I listen to at one speed is in and around anything with, I get it now, but in the early days, I'm used to his accent now, but Danny Brown has the coolest, him and Colin Gray, a fairly thick Scottish accent at times. I need to slow it down a bit. My brain can't keep up. Or just anybody where English is, well, that's not, I was going to say English is the second language, but it's not the case in somebody who's from Scotland. But sometimes if it's a, real super thick accent, I will slow, but almost everybody, the slowest I go is 1.25. And most of the time it's 1.5 or 1.75 is typically where I land. And then I'm using Cast-O-Matic, which has the smart speed very much like Overcast. I'm in the process right now of I love the podcasting 2.0 apps because they're doing the whole streaming Satoshi thing. And I want to give back to my podcasters. That's the good news. The bad news is these apps are driving me nuts because they're new. They're not, Overcast, a lot of these have years of code built into them. And I've probably in the last 2 weeks had Cast-O-Matic, and I've looked, it's not a variable bit rate thing where they just start over. I'm listening to an episode and it just starts over. So I started using TrueFans, which I like because it makes it easy to stream. But that app, I love you, Sam, but it takes me like 6 clicks to get back to the episode I was just listening to. So I think I'm going to go back to Overcast for 2.0 enabled shows because that's just a great experience, a great listening experience. And I said for years, you will pry Overcast from my cold dead hand. And then the 2.0 stuff, I'll pick an app that I like, but it's getting on my nerves. But you know what's not getting on my nerves? My awesome supporters. Yeah, if you go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, you can be an awesome supporter. It's super simple. And the show is also brought to you by the schoolofpodcasting.com, where we've got courses to walk you through the whole process from planning your podcast to world domination. It's all there in the course section. We've got an awesome built-in community and, of course, unlimited. And by that, I mean in as it doesn't end coaching. Well, with yours truly, you can use the coupon code COACH and just go to schoolofpodcasting.com/coach. I think we'll get you there. Also, you can look for that in the show notes. And my mouse skills are apparently dropped. I cannot click on the right button here, but it's also brought to you by Podpage. If you want to check out Podpage, just go to Ask the Podcast Coach. We use Podpage. And I've been talking about that way before I started working there, but it's so cool. That's why I work there now, because it's awesome. We're using Ecamm right now. If you go to askthepodcastcoach.com/Ecamm, that's what we use to live stream. Again, all this will have links in the show notes. And if you need more Jim Collison, and who doesn't need more Jim Collison? It's a very Nixon-esque kind of pose there, my friend. I am not a crook. I am, Jim is not a crook. Go over to theaverageguy.tv, and it's time for the moment you've been waiting for when we go over to the Wheel of Names. And so, who will it be? Will it be Ed Sullivan? Will it be the ladies from Keep the Flame Alive or Max or all these people? Well, let's click the wheel and find out. And the featured supporter is Ross Brand from Livestream Universe. He also has a new book out. I will put about video podcasting. I'll put a link to the book in the show notes as well. Ross, thank you for being an awesome supporter. You should be like Ross and be an awesome supporter as well. You can do that again by going over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And if we've saved you some time, if we've saved you some money, if we saved you a headache, or if we kept you educated, or if we just made you think or entertained you, again, super easy. askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And so let me head on over to, there we go. Yes, Daniel has a new idea. This will be the question of the month. You know, how to get a date with a beautiful celebrity to grow your podcast. One would be drop about 50 pounds for me. That would be start one. Yes. And we're having some talk about Bernie the Cat in the chat room. If you're not familiar with Bernie the Cat, go to berniethecatshow.com. That was my cat that I was so cool. I gave him his own show. So
How long's Bernie been gone now?
I would have to look it up. I'm sure it's on a calendar somewhere.
Four?
Which is always kind of
Four?
probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. People
but
love Bernie. And you did a nice job. I mean, in his final years, he was meowing so much because he was probably in a lot of pain and struggling and maybe a little out of his mind
could
at
be.
times. But
He was
you
definitely a
were
weird
good.
cat.
You were good about recording him, and it's one of those kinds of things. Yeah, it's not going to last forever. By the way, New Heights not going to last forever. Like this isn't
No.
going to be a forever thing. They're going to do this for a while, and they too will get sick of this. And all these things end at some point, with the exception of The Simpsons. All these things end. You always have to throw The Simpsons in because I don't think they're ever going to stop making.
Well,
things.
think about it. It could be like, you know, Bugs Bunny. Mel Blanc's been dead for years. They just found another guy to do Bugs' voice. So you could find somebody else that's like, I'm tired of being Homer, you know, and like, all right, you be Homer, you know. So
Generally we need new things. Like Johnny Carson may actually be an example too, like that, where it went way longer than normal. You know, he was just, I don't know, he just kept it going. He just kept showing up, you know, type deal. He just kept doing it. And nobody, nobody canceled his show on Johnny Carson, and he was allowed to go 30 years, something like that, late night, king of late night. And you can see now in that space how hard it is. Conan in and out, Jimmy Kimmel, that group that's in there. I could name a bunch. I'll just have an incomplete list there, but it's tough to go. And eventually, the people are like, you're yeah. I think of Craig Ferguson, who I really, as a comedian, I think is
yeah.
very, very funny. And Craig left at the top. Like, he was never more popular than he was when he himself walked away from that show, right?
Yeah.
And said, I need to do something different. He was tired of it. At the very top, I mean, the last week of filming for the Late Late Show, you couldn't get a ticket. It was packed. I think Craig even joked he couldn't even get his mom in to the show for the last show. There were so many people there. But it ended, and I'm sad. I love that show, but they don't go forever, right? And some of these trends, before we were talking about, Travis and Taylor, we were talking about Rogan, and he's getting a little less conversation these days. In this, he's a little less visible. Eventually, he'll give it up as well and do something different. He's another guy. If he's played his cards right, he has plenty of. He could do anything he wants. He's should have plenty of money.
Well, he started his own club in Austin, Texas now, and that guy was set before they gave him, at this point, $400 million over the last couple of years. So I think he's. I don't think he's checking the price when he goes to buy something. Rich has a question. He goes, "Hey, about Podpage, how many podcast app is smart to list on the /follow page?" Dealer's choice. There is a point, because you can have Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Ghana, JioSaavn, iHeart, blah, blah. And there is what's the phrase? It's, when you give people too many choices.
Paralysis by analysis.
Yeah. And so I know a lot of people, and it might be coming soon, because now that we've got the navigation, which was a big, big job that Brendan did, maybe now that that's out, and it's almost like we're still occasionally going, ooh, that's a weird little bug, and he's squashing those things. He's great at that. But one of the things I suggested is, can we have a first string? Can I say, hey, on the episode, show an Apple and Spotify, which will get you about 80%, and then have a more button that would then pop up all the other ones? Because for the most part, people are looking for that. Or if you like, well, I don't like Spotify, I want to use Podcast Guru and Cast-O-Matic. just some way to go, okay, these are the ones I want to always show, and then these are going to be more. So when I threw that at Brendan, he's like, oh, that's not a bad idea. And I'm like, because it is. You want to be everywhere, but if you show everywhere, people are like, they've got to scroll a page and a half to get to the content because you've got, this big giant block of buttons on your website. So I would say the minimum would be Apple and Spotify. Anything above that is, personal choice. So, and that's where, like for me, I forget what show I was looking at, but I had a pretty big Pocket Cast listenership was like number 3, and I was like, oh, I should make that easier because for whatever reason, this audience seems to, and that's without Pocket Cast being prevalent. I mean, it was in the list of stuff, so it might be look at your audience and see what the current people are using, and then maybe start with those. And
Yeah. Yeah, you took my answer. I was going to say, look at your stats and see, and certainly prioritize those, right? If you have a bunch of those, and then maybe there's some other ones you could call out from, that based on your niche or based on your location. I mean, this could be location based. This is why you really can't give a number. You should really think about this. Like, where am I located? What are you listeners using? I might want to. What was the one in Europe that Deezer? Was it
yeah,
Deezer that's big in Europe? Maybe a lot of your listeners are in Europe, or you're in Europe, and you want to include Deezer in there as opposed to not including it. So I think you need to think through it from a stats perspective. You need to think through it from a design perspective. Like you said, Dave, if you give 50, I don't know how many are available. I'll just say you give 50. That may be too overwhelming. So you might want to boil that down to the 5 to 7 that most of your listeners are currently on, because good chance you got some traction in that, and then maybe some opportunity to add a few others that are either important to you or you might want to grow, or some of those kinds of things. You also, this audience survey question, like, what are you listening to the podcast on, so you could get some additional information from those users. Certainly, if you're going to advertise on one of those podcast platforms for your show, you're going to want to make sure that is available on your page as well.
yeah. Maybe I missed something. Ralph says I really didn't answer Craig's question, and it's something that so many podcasters on a daily basis. It really does deserve some.
I think you did. We didn't say a specific number,
Yeah.
right? His
Well,
question was how many. Well,
how
kind of
how
depends.
many? Wait. Oh no, I think because Craig's question, because that was Rich's question. Craig's question
Oh,
was, how do you know when to quit? When it's not fun for a consistent basis.
how to quit a podcast?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think, wasn't that Craig's? Fill us in there, Ralph. Maybe I'm missing something. Um, oh, this is a great one. What's the best podcasting 2.0 listening app? I might be done with Castmatic. Yeah, I on one hand, I'm sitting here complaining because it's acting up a little weird, and then the other hand is, as a guy who worked in support, have I let the guys at Castmatic go, hey, this thing's driving me nuts, and here's what it's doing? No, I haven't done that. So shame on me, because as someone who worked in support and still does, you can't fix what you don't know is broken. So you got to let them know. I have been sniffing Podcast Guru, because that is a iOS, Android, and web-based app. I'm looking for something that I can listen on my computer, like pull it up on it, and not so much on my phone. I don't want to have to Bluetooth my phone into my, have a web-based version. And when I get done with that, hit stop, I can pick up my phone and pick up right where I left off. And the best app for that, that's absolutely gorgeous, is Podurama. That's the good news. Bad news is no podcasting 2.0 stuff in it. Overcast has they have a web-based version. They're not podcasting 2.0, and their web-based version, admittedly, Marco said, yeah, this is an afterthought. Like, it's cool, but Podurama is beautiful, and I've emailed them multiple times saying, could you please add 2.0 stuff? Pocket Casts has a nice web version, but again, they embrace some 2.0 stuff, but not the streaming Satoshi thing. So depending on what you're looking for, but if Pocket Cast, I every time they come out with like, here's some new features, I get that email and I instantly hit reply and go, where's the streaming Satoshis? And I just don't think, some companies are like, yeah, we're not going to touch that. I just, that's, I don't know how hard it is, because you get into wallets, and I think I said this last week when I was talking to the guy from Apple. They're not anti 2.0. It just, and he said it needs to be easy, like easy. And I need to load that app I talked about and see just how easy it is to stream them. But man, the super chats are coming in here. Thank you, Ray. Ray. Well, if you take DR, see if you look at the R and Faye, your eyes go
You can
cross-eyed.
call me Ray, and
Yeah.
you can call me Jay, and you can.
Yeah. If you want to hear DR more, I met Mark with glasses at and he does I believe it's the I should know this. It's like I know it's morning chat. Podcaster morning chat. I think that's it. I can't remember if the word daily is in there, but they do it Monday through Friday on Clubhouse at 7 a.m. And DR is pretty much the co-host of that show. So I pop in and out of that one. So thank you, DR, for the super chat. Deeply appreciate that. And then the one and only Bangs Naughty Bits.
Woohoo!
Yeah, thank you so much for the super chat. How about all the new legal geographical restrictions that are hitting various walled garden platforms? I've missed you, Bangs. I've missed you so much. It's such a Bangs question. The geographical restrictions. I know not of. Do you know what he's talking about, Jim?
I wouldn't be up to speed enough to comment on it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah. Ray almost got credit for that super chat, but Ray is already a supporter. He's a member of the School of Podcast. Thank you, Mark.
We like you too, Ray. We do like you.
I don't think it's rancic though. It's ironic. It's something like ironic, but it's not. But it's here. Let me look it up. Podcaster. I know it's like morning chat. It reminds me of Good Morning Podcasters, which used to be Fuzz Martin, and then that show, which was the guy that was all about Spotify. Oh, I can't think of his name, but he sold the show because he went on to do something about not skeptics. Anyway, my brain is not apparently awake this morning, but I don't know what happened to that show. But if you're looking for a daily show, podcasting morning chat. Thank you, DR. And also on Podpage, by the way. And so it's an interesting show. It's a lot like this show because it's on Clubhouse. You hear more voices. People here like to communicate via chat, which is fine. You can always go to askthepodcastcoach.com/question and jump in if you want. So
did we do Clubhouse? Did we try a Saturday on Clubhouse?
We did. I used to Bluetooth it in. Maybe I'll start doing that.
No. I meant like completely on Clubhouse, where
no. Everything's always been on here, and then remember we did the Genius thing for a while, and I think we did Clubhouse, and I think the reason we quit doing it is because we weren't getting any traction. I think was one, and then we were always kind of. Anytime you add more tech, it's one more place where things can break out down. Thank you. Here we go. Mark Ronick or Ronick. Take your pick. Ronick. Because
Ralph got back to you, Dave. He did say in the chat he was interested in a continued discussion around quitting, right? And that for this, and it is. I mean, for a lot of podcasters, they start. It's hard work. Most of us have said everything that we have to say in the first 15 episodes. We think we have more to say. We really don't have that much more to say. I mean, you start repeating yourself, especially if it's very topic centric. Thank God we cover all of podcasting. Otherwise, I mean, imagine if we tried to do a niche on this show, we already run out of topics to talk about most weeks. Thank goodness it was Labor Day today, and we had a big labor conversation, which we've never had before. And you're right, it was awesome. So every once in a while, you find a new topic to bring in. Bangs is trying to do that with the walled garden. I don't think either one of us have enough knowledge to talk through that, but it is one of those things where eventually you kind of feel like, man, I've covered it all. I'm saying it all. You and I in the pre-show say this all the time. You always start with, well, it's the same things out on social, right? Yet we find things to talk about, mostly because of the chat room, as we keep it that way. But at what point do you know? and I'd love to say, Dave, there's this magic spot when you do, but you've said it before. You've got to, if you're, and I always like to start, if you wake up one day and you don't want to do it, that's the beginning of questioning it, right? That doesn't mean you end it there. No. I mean, there may be some adversity going on in your podcast at that moment that's going to go away. You might need to push through that adversity and to get to the other side of it, because your podcast might get better through adversity. So don't just let your feelings dictate it. If you have a plan around it, finish the plan. If you got some ideas you want to get out, get those ideas out. This is a decision you have to make, and you alone. Certainly you can get advice and some folks from, get some folks advice around you on it. But at some point in time, I think you just have to sit down with yourself and say, do I want to do this? And then don't quit at that point. If you say yes, don't quit right away. Push through for another couple episodes. And if it's still there, okay, then maybe that is the time to pull the plug on it. And by the way, pulling a plug on a podcast, taking a break and coming back, you can do that too. You don't have to, there's no rules on this thing. You can do it however you want. You could slow it down, you take a break, whatever. Just know all those things have consequences. And so, you're not going to, you're not going to keep everybody if you stop for a while.
Well, the other reason you quit, of course, the number one reason, I forgot to bring this up, they're selfish. They just come into a room and it's all about them. You know them, you love them, you hate them in some cases. Babies often are the death of podcasting. So what your life was when you started is not what it is now. And I was thinking about Weekly Web Tools. Weekly Web Tools was a show I did for probably 10 years. And I just, at that point, I'm like, I think I've talked about every tool I want to talk about. And I was again, putting out content that I wasn't really like, oh, this is good. Oh, my audience will love this. It was like, this will do. And I just, that was one, it was the weirdest show. I would get everyone, hey, what tools are you using? Let me know by going to weeklywebtools.com, blah, blah, nothing, like just crickets. And then I would say, hey, I'm thinking about ending the show, blah, blah, blah. And I'd have to like threaten my audience. And then they'd be like, oh, don't go. I love this show. I'm like, oh, now you're engaged. And that's not a good way. You don't want to, engage your audience with a stick, but that was just one. After a while, I was like, it's too much time to find something that I'm excited to talk about. My why was like, I don't know why I did that. I guess because I thought it was fun. It was a fun show. It wasn't fun anymore. And I was like, but yeah, Ralph kind of hits this. Like, the question about quitting is pretty much simple. Are you still able to reach your why, or have you covered it? And, so for me, I was just like, no. I'm trying to think of other shows that I quit. Podcast Rodeo Show. I have 3 shows now that I do when you pay me. Podcast Rodeo Show, $5. $5. And if that's too much, then you're not, then I have the Podcast Hot Seat. And I've come to the conclusion on this. I'll get to that in a second. Podcast Hot Seat. I'll review your show and your website, and you get a free month at the School of Podcasting, podcasthotseat.com. Then I've got the Podcast Review Show. We, as in me and Eric K. Johnson, will look at your episode and your website and answer your questions, bring you on, et cetera, et cetera. And I've come to the conclusion that people do not like to be reviewed in public, or they just don't like me, one of the two. But, or 3, I'm sure there are many other options, but I just was like, all right, this is what it is. I put it out there. It's there if you want it. If you don't, that's fine. But like, there it is. And that's my why. If you want my opinion, if you want to pick my brain, that's fine. I got a lot of people that are paying me to pick my brain. I'm not going to allow you to pick my brain for free unless you wake up on Saturday morning. That's why this show exists.
Right here.
So the person's like, oh, I can't afford that. I'm like, okay, just get up on Saturday morning. Oh, I can't do that, which is my favorite answer of people like, I want to grow my show. Oh, do this, that, and that. And they go, yeah, I don't want to do that. So that's always fun.
It's too hard.
Yeah. Stephanie says, if you feel like you spoke about it again, or if you feel like you've spoken about it all, speak about it again. And then if you don't want to do that, then quit. I repeat stuff on occasion. I repeat examples all the time. if somebody brings up a title, they're going to go, oh no, Dave's going to talk about After the Darkness again. I'm like, yeah, it's a great example, but people have heard that a billion times. And there are times when I just go to the different groups and I see people, asking the same questions. So I'm like, well, people still have this question. And then I try to see if I can come up with the same topic with a different slant. I know I've covered imposter syndrome probably 2 or 3 times, and each time I've come with kind of a different slant on it. They're talking about daily podcast and batching in the future. Ralph, my hat's to you, man. When you say I'm thinking of quitting my podcast, my first thing would be, hey, how about ditching that daily thing? Because it's hard. It's really hard to get content. If the goal is to position yourself as an expert, as a thought leader, that means you got to go develop some thoughts. And to develop thoughts on a daily basis that show your expertise. Now, Ralph's been doing accounting for 30 plus years, so he's got a lot of it up in his noggin. But daily it's a grind that I've just seen, many people. So that would be it. It's tough.
But to Ralph's comment, do they really fail because you stop? Is that a failure?
No. Oh,
right. I know what he's trying to say, Ralph. I listen. I agree with the statement that you're making there, and lots of folks stop podcasting because it's a lot of hard work, and that is very true. I would hesitate to equate stopping and failure. Not in all cases.
Oh no, I mean,
yeah.
There's a show in the early days of podcasting. We're talking 2006. There was a show called Ask a Ninja. It was a video podcast, and yes, you can watch videos on Apple Podcasts. Super popular, hilarious. It's on YouTube. But at one point, that show was on Netflix. They got a deal to be on Netflix. So this solo podcaster, and it was just so ridiculously ridiculous. It was, Ask a Ninja. So you're asking this ninja about, dating advice. And it was just hilarious. And so, but that show hasn't put out a new episode in probably about 10 years. Is that a failure? He stopped. I'm like, I don't think so. He got on Netflix, so it kind of goes back to your why, but was Cheers a failure? Seinfeld, MASH, they all quit. No, you kind of, there comes a time when you're like, either in the case of Seinfeld and MASH, I know, and actually all those, they kind of said, hey, we don't want to be Kiss. We don't want to go out when we can't sing anymore and should have probably quit 3 years ago. I don't want to be Foreigner where there's nobody in the band that was actually in the band. You know what I mean? It's basically a glorified cover act. So, and then the other thing we should mention, if you do decide to quit a show and you have another one. So let's say it's Craig. He's got Live Well and Flourish, which he's been doing for a while. And maybe he's just like, I think I've said all I can about Live Well and Flourish. On your way out, say, hey, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to keep the episodes up for a while. So again, go to livewellandflourish.com/follow. Get the old back episodes if you want to keep them. But they are going to be up for a little bit. But if you want more content from me, check me out at AI Goes to College, because often they come for the content, but they stay for the host. So they feel like they have a relationship with you, and they may not be into AI, but if that's the only thing you're talking about, they might go over to check it out. So if you or if you start a new podcast, hey, I'm tired of talking about this, I'm going to be talking about this over at that. And that's the case where if you are pausing a show to do another one, make sure you have the website up, make sure you have all the follow things going on so that as you close one door, you're opening another. But the real Brian does the show Profit Cast, and that would be one thing. If you're not 100% sure that you're done with the show, he used to have the domain Profit Cast and apparently let it go because he's like, I'm not coming back. And then 8 years later, he came back, and I think it's at like rockyourpodcast.com or something, because that's Brian's little catchphrase. He goes, let's rock it. So but it came back after literally I think it was 8 years. Daniel took years off from, I don't know where his priorities are. He decided to go raise his kid. Like, wait, what? Putting family first? That's cray. But no. So, and then he came back, and that's what you do. So, there may be times I am really tempted to do an episode of the the Marketing Musician podcast, because of all the 2.0 streaming Satoshi stuff that's now worming its way into the music scene, where people are making more money in, a week using this new streaming Satoshi stuff than they have in years on Spotify. And I think I have to go back and listen to my last episode of that show. I think I said if I find something interesting, I'll let you know about it. So, DR says, would podcasting 2.0 help when it comes to transferring your download numbers to a new host? No. I tell my clients to take lots of screenshots for any kind of media kit. Download your stats as a CSV file. I know Buzzsprout and Captivate, you can put your old numbers in. So I know, let's say I had 11 downloads on Buzzsprout. I can go in and say, oh, this episode actually got 450 downloads on my previous host. It'll then show the total numbers 462. But I can't see how many downloads I had on episode 4 back in, July of 2016. That kind of detail is gone, but you can transfer the total number of downloads. And so that's it. Daniel says, I love the t-shirt. You can prick my brain after you picked your payment method. That's awesome. Hey, speaking of t-shirts, I am wearing a cool one now. Nobody can see it. Let me switch to the me camera. This is, let me look at that. Pretty cool. And I looked at this, right? And I was like, hey, company, your logo isn't here. Jim, can you spot the logo in this shirt? It says hit record. It's got this big skull and he's got headphones on, but there is a logo in here. Do you see it? You'd have to know.
I'm having trouble seeing it.
It's right on the headphone thingy. I can't hold this and point, but this is the Captivate logo. Left is right, right. Yeah, it's right here.
I guess I don't know Captivate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw, I'm like, where's Captivate.fm? And they're like, oh, it's right there. And I was like, oh, very cool. But when you get it bigger than you need it to be big, so that when it shrinks, it fits, it's at this point, I would have to stand up to show you this because it's down by my belly. So
if you have to show it, is it really a logo?
Yeah. Well, but I wanted to bring up t-shirts because I was sitting in a Chipotle in Washington, D.C., and they had this little table with bar stools for single people to sit there, and you faced outside. I'm like, oh, this is great. I can people watch while I eat my chicken bowl. And I sat there, but I had the t-shirt on, and you always joke about how, Dave, I always make the letters too big. And it said, I help podcasters. It's what I do, schoolofpodcasting.com. And somebody actually came into the Chipotle, and I'm sitting there with my earbuds on. He taps me on the shoulder. He's like, what do you do for podcasters? And I was like, oh, and he goes, yeah, I saw your shirt when I was walking by. And I was like, there you go. So score one for the t-shirt swag. And anytime I'm in public, I went out last night. I had a friend in town, and we went out, and the first thing I did was put on a School of Podcasting t-shirt, because if I'm going to be in public, I'm going to be promoting myself. Going back to quitting, Ralph says, podcasts fail because most people are lazy and just want the easy way and aren't interested into the hard work. I know people may hate me for this comment, but that's the truth. Well, isn't that the truth about anything in a way? If you're lazy, success really isn't going to come your way, probably. I mean, people look into it. I have not heard this. I heard that pick my brain is a negative thing to say. Maybe to somebody with a concussion. I don't know. Let's see. Bill says, can I find this live stream on platforms other than YouTube? Yeah. Go to askthepodcastcoach.com/follow, and you'll see it's on Apple and Spotify and Castmagic and
live though. Where else is it
live?
LinkedIn.
Well, typically it's on LinkedIn. LinkedIn was like, see you bye halfway through today's show. So I think
we said something controversial. We were getting a little controversial, and I think they booted us.
Oh, maybe that's it. We said, we did say the word Trump, and I remember once Daniel and I were talking about censorship on the Future of Podcasting show, and literally instantly, and I didn't even say pro or con. It was like, hey, censorship, blah, blah, blah on X something Trump. And instantly we got comments like, I didn't know Trump and blah, blah, And I was like, oh, here we go. So I'm going to get kicked off again because now I've said it 3 times. Craig says, one of the things I'm changing about Live Well and Flourish is to only do episodes when the spirit moves me. That's building a better Dave. I have an episode in my head that I haven't done yet that I want to do, but that show is on a when I feel like it basis.
Dan did remind us. You also talked about the D picks, so
Oh, that's it.
that was during that time as well. Maybe that got you banned.
It could be.
That,
Yeah,
that was pretty bold, Dave. I'm gonna say I may not have had that same boldness to use that term.
well, here's the
live.
thing. Here's the thing that's sad about that. Do I agree with that term? No. But is that the term that people use? Like it's
Yeah.
sad
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
to me, I don't use the F word a lot, but if I use it, it's because I mean it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I hate the fact that
No.
in stuff, except it's not stuff. People are like, stuff. And like there's a lot of swearing. And look, I'm not a prude. Like I am the son of a truck driver. So I've heard these words. But so on one hand, I'm like, I wish society wasn't so prone to just drop these words and maybe be a little more creative, maybe pull out a dictionary and come up with a new adjective.
Yeah.
That's what I wish life was. But, in that thing, I said, go find a 10-year-old and hang around don't hang around 10-year-olds on a playground. That'll make you look a little creepy. But, I have great nieces and nephews and they didn't know I was listening. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting word. And they're, and you're like, wait, you're a little kid. And you're like, no, you're 12. And I was like, so it's
Yeah.
just one of those things where I'm sad that that's the state of, where
Well,
we are today.
But to be fair, there may be someone in our audience listening to this in their car, and they
Yeah.
have a 6-year-old
Well,
who is, and typically typically we are safe for listening. While I'm not
Yeah.
offended by that word, that
you know what,
may-
I might bleep
know.
it. Yeah, I'll probably
Oh.
bleep it. When it goes, it'll be here on
Yeah.
YouTube, but I'll
Maybe
probably
good.
bleep it. But I
wouldn't have thought of that. I wouldn't have thought of that until we said it. But
Yeah,
maybe it's a good idea.
and also I didn't give much. I gave like a 10-second, like, hey, if you got kids, you might want to turn this down, and then I just went right into it.
That's
So-
true. That's
And there
true.
wasn't much of a warning there.
No, it's a
And being
good
controversial, Ray says, well, really, your Kiss comment might be the most controversial thing. I'll get the Kiss Army after me. What are you talking about?
You don't want that. Yeah. you
Yeah.
don't want that.
Let's see what else have we got here. We're over time. Holy cow.
I think we're done. Yeah, I
We
think
are
we're
done. So it's time to do the, hit the ending credits and, thank our awesome supporters and ask Jim what's coming up on theaverageguy.tv.
TJ Huddleston from hometech.fm joins me. A year ago, he bought a house and he's been home assistant or home automating it, so to speak. And so lots to catch up with on lighting and light switches. And he's got a robot lawnmower and he's doing some of those kinds of things to his place. We talk about it all, that plus more. You can see it. You can hear it right now, theaverageguy.tv or on Podpage, homegadgetgeeks.com.
Yeah, we already have the question. We're ready to start next week.
Yeah.
Ralph says, how do you change your mindset and stop worrying about download numbers? I think that just comes with time, but yeah, maybe we will hit that next week. On the School of Podcasting, somewhat related to value for value, or for the whole 2.0 thing, I'm going to talk about value for value, and I'm going to look at, because there are a ton of these now. I mean, Buzzsprout, Captivate, Supercast, Patreon. There are a ton of these, Buy Me a Coffee, HipPay. There's a ton of these, and I'm going to go through and say, all right, here's the pros and cons of each. And if you're trying to get your audience to somehow give you some money because you gave them some value, here's some things you can do. And I will give you a hint. Patreon is not my top choice. And people are like, what? But everybody uses Patreon. Well, everybody uses Patreon because everybody uses Patreon. Doesn't mean they're the top one. So that'll be coming up on the School of Podcasting this week. Thanks, as always, to Mark at podcastbranding.co and Dan at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. Thanks to the awesome chat room, and thank you all for the super chats. And like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that other fun stuff. Thanks to Jim Cullison. What an awesome co-host. Love you, buddy. And we'll see you next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach.